This is a CBC News special presentation.
8 decades ago, this is how they waited. 14,000 Canadians ready to take on Hitler's ferocious army, knowing just a few heartbeats away waited defeat or glory. Thousands of volunteer soldiers hurled themselves into waist-deep water, sprinted across the mine-laced beaches, and ran headlong into machine gun fire. June 6, 1944, D-Day, a day that changed the course of the Second World War, fueled by individual acts of astonishing bravery. Counties, towns, and cities across Canada sent their sons, their brothers, their fathers to liberate this place. This French beach forever intertwined with places in our geography: Winnipeg, New Westminster, Pembroke, Rivière-du-Loup, St. Stephen. In their hometowns, they were farmers, they were students, but by the end of the day here, they were heroes. See, I don't understand how you were able to put one foot in front of the other. Is that just the training, or are you built different?
No, you just move forward. You're always trained to move forward. Do what you had to do.
But like the sand on the beach, 80 years on, their stories themselves risk slipping away.
We have 11 veterans from World War II who are traveling with us.
Which is why we're here now. We have to be here now to listen to the few veterans not silenced by time, now in their 90s or past 100, as they pass on their memories and the hope they have for the world they saved. Canada, welcome to Juno Beach in Courcelles-sur-Mer, Normandy, where thousands have gathered at 10 o'clock in the morning to pay respects to the soldiers and the service personnel who fought a pivotal battle right here 80 years ago. Hello, I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Thank you for joining us. The beach itself is just past, all those students just past the sand dunes behind us, and it stretches for 10 kilometers along the coast. And all these years later, only a handful of D-Day veterans are still with us. There are 4 veterans who fought here on June the 6th who've made the journey, and a total of 13 Second World War vets who are here for Canada. Most of them are months shy of 100 years old. At least one is 105. Remarkable then to think that they've managed to come all this way. Imagine the effort that takes. So over the next few hours, we'll see some moments you won't forget, moments of remembrance, remarks from both the Prince of Wales and Canada's Prime Minister, but the stars of the show today and always are those veterans, and we expect to see them head down to the water again after the ceremony this morning. Watch for that in particular. I promise you, it is extraordinary to see. So we have a number of people helping us tell the story of this morning. And let's head out to Julia Wong. Good morning, Julia.
Hi, Adrienne. You know, we've been here for a little bit, and this area for the public, that's been starting to fill up over the last sort of half hour. Hundreds of people have been streaming through, and especially as that procession has started, folks here on one edge of the fence, and as you can see behind me, there are a few people deep on this side, have been sort of craning their necks, trying to get their best glimpse of these ceremonies as they get underway. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit too short. I can't see most of it, but from what I can hear and from the reaction that we're getting from the crowd, everyone is just thrilled to be here. And actually, 2 people specifically who are thrilled to be here are my guests. We have Eris Simonides and Tess Baird. They are from Mayfield Secondary School in Caledon. Eris, you brought these students here, 39 students from grade 9 to 12, specifically so you guys could mark this milestone. Tell me, why was it important for these students to be here?
Well, I think it starts as a history trip, but it turns into a pilgrimage because this land has been purchased with Canadian blood, and we helped liberate Europe from the fascists, and so they see the cemeteries, they see the battlefields, and it becomes more than just, hey, we're going to Europe for 10 days. It becomes part of them.
And Tess, you're a grade 11 student. You were one of the first people to pay for this trip. Tell me, why did you act on it so quickly?
Well, as soon as I heard about it, I just knew what an honor and what a privilege it would be to be here. And not a lot of kids get this opportunity, so I had to take it as soon as I possibly could.
All right, and what an experience it will be for Tess and the students that she's here with. Lots more to unfold, obviously, as the morning goes on. But for the meanwhile, back to you.
Thanks, Julia. And just to sort of orient everyone here, Julia is only a few hundred meters away from us in the public areas. Where we are near Juno Beach, about 100 meters to my right is the Juno Beach Center. So we're all relatively close here. And along with us this morning, gratefully, is Tim Cook. He's the chief historian and the director of research at the Canadian War Museum. And so, Tim, we've been talking a little bit over the past few days about the meaning of this place and this moment. But now that we're in it, what are you thinking about?
Well, it feels fraught, emotionally fraught. There are so many Canadians here. This is a day of history, and we are on a site of history. I just think 80 years ago, about an hour ago, the Canadians came ashore here. They were fighting through this area. The Germans were defending with multiple machine guns. And here we are 80 years later, returning. We see young people. We have veterans here. This is a day for Canadians, and it's also a day for Canada, because 80 years ago, we stood shoulder to shoulder with our allies, the Americans, the British, and the Canadians coming ashore. This is something to mark.
It's astonishing, too, as you walk this morning, sort of walking through Courcelles-sur-Mer, there are Canadian flags everywhere. There are along the whole 10-kilometer stretch of Juno Beach.
Yeah.
And the connection feels real.
Yeah, such gratitude. I was walking and seeing those flags, French people here coming up to us saying thank you. And the veterans, we've seen them, we've talked to them, treated almost like movie stars.
Absolutely. The veterans, by the way, have been signing autograph books. Little kids are coming up to them whenever they see them and saying, please, can you sign this? Can I have a selfie with you? And their smiles are huge. It's very special.
Yeah, it is something. And to think thousands of Canadians who have made that trip here to mark this key event, this is going to be special.
Absolutely. So marking this day is about keeping the history alive in our collective memory, understanding just how monumental a shift in the world it really was. So, as Tim said, let's remember that as of the morning of June 6, 1944, Hitler's Nazi forces had occupied France and most of Western Europe for years. Here is how the Allies would finally turn that around.
We take you now to Ottawa.
At 3:30 this morning, the government received official word that the invasion of Western Europe had begun. Word was also received that the Canadian troops were among the Allied forces who landed this morning on the northern coast of France.
An audacious plan, so uncertain after the disaster at Dieppe 2 years prior. This time, a truly massive operation. The goal to establish a vast beachhead in France and push the Nazis back to Berlin. Allied forces would storm the coast at Normandy at 5 separate points. The Canadians coming ashore at a long stretch of beach codenamed Juno.
We crashed through the famous German West Wall, and so began the liberation of France and of Europe and of the world.
June 6, before dawn, Canadian paratroopers jump into the night to capture and destroy key German positions. And then, the aerial bombardment, the guns of the Royal Canadian Navy, and a tidal wave of Canadian soldiers crashing onto Juno Beach. They plunge into enemy fire, fighting for territory and to liberate the people who live there.
Canadian assault troops went almost contemptuously through minefields and curtains of machine gun fire to clear the beaches.
their great success comes with great sacrifice. 359 Canadian troops were killed in the assault and hundreds more wounded. The start of a months-long campaign to drive back the Nazi war machine. A critical turning point for the Allies and for Canada as a country, as the blood and bravery of Canadian men earns the nation its seat at the table among the global powers. So we're just going to take a moment here because we've been watching the skies behind us. A few moments ago, a number of C-130s came by with their backs open. They dropped some streamers down, and that's because they're testing the wind, because you're about to see some paratroopers, because the conditions are really perfect for it. It wouldn't have been perfect for war. They wouldn't want to drop in clear skies. But you can see on your screen there, those are the streamers to test the wind and the direction. And the paratroopers, we'll let you know, are about to sort of land on Juno Beach. When we think, Tim, about the paratroopers and what they went through, can you help us understand what that would have been like? Because they came before anyone else.
They did, that's right. We're thinking of today, the infantry hitting the beaches at 8 a.m., but about 3 or 4 hours before that, the Allies dropped into Normandy 3 divisions worth of paratroopers, including 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion. So Canadians were involved in that. The problem was they were spread everywhere, and so it was a chaotic drop. But that helped the Allies because it confused the Germans. They had no idea what was happening. They thought there was an assault on them. And so that was really the start of this. And so Canadians were in battle. About 20 were killed during the course of the night and the day. Others were captured. Some were wounded. So this is appropriate, I think, to think of our Canadians now dropping in better conditions, as you have said. But think 80 years ago of those Canadians who dropped out with their British and American comrades into the darkness.
All alone.
All alone into occupied territory. Landing on the ground with only light weapons, they couldn't drop in with artillery or anything, and then having to fight their way to their objectives.
Did you ever hear the stories that they told about what that was like? Because I can't imagine that either the isolation of that or the terror of that.
I was able to talk to a number of those veterans. They've all passed away. One of the great things at the War Museum is to speak to veterans, some who have volunteered there. They did talk about that. These were brave guys, and they were well trained, but they talked about the chaos of not knowing where anyone was, not knowing if their friends had survived, gunfire throughout the night, and they were spread over kilometers, and so they had to come together, find each other. Officers were lost, senior NCOs were lost, so we had privates who were leading these attacks against German forces, and this is really the start of D-Day.
Interesting. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to keep an eye on the skies, to keep an eye for those paratroopers. But while we're talking, we'd like to head out to our senior defense correspondent. I can't think of a better person to talk to other than you today, of course, other than Murray Brewster. So Murray, you're with some people who are doing something pretty special today.
That's right, Adrienne. Good morning, and I'd like to introduce you to Don Levers and his daughter Jen and his granddaughter Sophie. And Don, we featured on The National last night. His father was wounded on D-Day, and he and his family have come to retrace their steps. So Don has been looking for precisely where his father was wounded. His father served with the Winnipeg Rifles. Don, so did you manage to find the field where your father was wounded?
We got our way up to St. Croix-sur-Mer on the outskirts of town, and we're pretty sure we found as close as we could to the spot where he was actually wounded.
And what was that like?
It was surreal, just like listening to his voice after 80 years. So being able to find that spot meant a lot.
Jen, I'd like to talk to you a little bit because, I mean, most of what you know about your grandfather's D-Day service has come from your father. What's this experience been like for you?
Yeah, I guess surreal really covers it. It's been amazing to get to show Sophie, who really had even less of an understanding of it than I do. So it's been really amazing to get to see exactly where my grandfather would have landed and to where he got injured to allow us to come here today.
What's the memory you're going to take away from this?
The whole trip. Being with family.
Sophie, can you tell me a little bit about what was going through your mind when you got to the spot where your grandfather was wounded?
I felt very overwhelmed and very grateful that he was able to make it out alive so that we could all be here today.
What are you going to tell your friends when you get home about your experience?
That it should be very clear that, like, to be able to learn about this, and it should be like people should get to learn about it and not just forget about it at schools.
Thanks very much. Adrienne, back to you.
Murray, thank you. Thank you for that interview. The emotion in there may surprise some people, but it's very real, and I have a lot of respect for the people who feel that family connection. We're keeping an eye on the skies again because we can hear them. We can hear the Hercules above. We understand that I think that they've established that the conditions are good. The plan is that the Skyhawks will perform some acrobatic maneuvers, and so we're just keeping an eye. And as we wait for them, we will see them. You'll see them. I just wanted to ask again a little bit more about what would have happened, Tim, had all of this not worked.
Yeah, that's important to think about. We know how it ended, right? We know 80 years later, the guys on that day, they had no idea. And I think of those young men. They'd been training for years for this. They didn't know the plans, but there were elaborate deception plans, of course. The Germans, they knew the Allies were coming. They could see the preparation, but the Allies had turned secret agents. They had convinced the Germans that the main attack would be in the Calais region and
Somewhere
not
else.
here.
Yeah.
And yet still, they thought it was about a 50-50 chance. 50-50. So 150,000 Allied soldiers coming ashore, and they could have been annihilated. And so I think of those young men as they were moving towards the beaches in their landing craft. The bombardment has crushed opposition, they are told, but then the machine gun bullets begin to ring off the steel hull, and they realize that in fact the German defenses are full, that they are there. Those machine guns are ready. And that must have been a moment of terror, facing their own mortality, these young men, not knowing what would happen, and then the doors drop and they hit the beaches.
How horrified would they have been to learn that Eisenhower had in his pocket a letter of defeat?
Yes, I can't imagine that. And isn't that an incredible story? Two letters, one of defeat, one of success. And so that's your 50-50 right there. Because the Germans were battle tested. They had armored formations. They, in fact, welcomed this invasion because they felt they could defeat it and then turn to the Red Army in the east. And that is really sobering, I think. I've always found that sobering. Those young guys, not knowing that, moving in, saying their final prayers, writing last letters. And Adrienne, I know you've probably seen some of these, had they've survived, but letters to mothers, to their kids, what would happen if they didn't make it back. And we know that almost 400 Canadians on this day 80 years ago were killed. Another 700 wounded or captured. That's astonishing. That gives you a sense of the brutality and violence that these Canadians faced on this beach that we are sitting here today on.
And those letters are available to be seen. I mean, if you ever get a chance to go to the Canadian War Museum, some of them are there.
They're there. They're at the National Archives. They're with families. I mean, often I will talk to families. People say, "I have these letters from my grandfather. Would you like them?"
Right.
I always say, "Hold on to them. They're your
Right.
letters. This is the stuff of history."
Right. So bear with us one moment here. I feel pretty lucky to say, by the way, that our teams were able to spend some time with a few of the veterans who are here today. I went to a few of their homes before they made the journey. We talked for a bit. We're talking about men who fought on the beaches, who were at sea, or who were in the air. You'll hear from them throughout the day, and we will share one of those conversations with you in a moment. We just want to check the sky one more time. Let's share that conversation with you and then come back to the Skyhawks here.
Our carriers got overflowed with water, and we had to swim.
So you swam
Yeah.
to the beach. How did you protect your weapon?
We lost everything. I had nothing.
No weapon.
No weapon. The landing craft had got in there with the infantry in there. And so the first guy I saw was mortally wounded, a Corporal Scaife. So I took his helmet, I took his grenades, and I took his Sten gun. He had a Sten gun.
Yeah.
So I took a Sten gun. Scaife was in Saskatchewan. I remember him, yeah.
It's amazing to me that you remember all these names so well.
Well, the name liveth forevermore. So I made sure when I talk, like I'm talking to you, Corporal Martin, Corporal Scaife. Their names are still being told. They're buried in Benny-sur-Mer, but I'm telling you their names right now.
It's a way of keeping them alive.
Yeah, the name liveth forevermore. That's right in the graveyard. You've seen it there, right? The name liveth forevermore. Yeah.
It is interesting that when you speak with the veterans, people like Jim Parks go out of their way to say the names of the friends they lost, to say them over and over again. It's a really important thing, and it's very special to hear it. As you're looking at the screen, on the one side you see us, on the other side you see some of those paratroopers who have dropped with those Canadian flags. It's interesting, Tim, to see how long it takes. I mean, it's an interesting reminder of what that must feel like, because they dropped just about a minute and a half ago.
Yeah.
And they're still up there.
I've never jumped out of a plane.
No.
I wouldn't want to.
No.
But the training is incredible. The Canadians 80 years ago who trained, often jumping out. But that long drop into darkness, veterans have talked about that, and not knowing what was down there, but understanding that the Germans were there with rifles, with machine guns, and they are totally vulnerable as they drop down.
Look how beautiful this is. Same place, very different era, very different circumstances.
That's right, different flag. But isn't it interesting to see the flag that is such a powerful symbol that we've seen here all around us? People waving flags behind us, people wearing flags. The French have put up Canadian flags all through this Juno Beach area.
Canada and the Canadian Armed Forces at Juno Beach. And we'd like to thank our hosts for giving us this opportunity. Matelot de première classe pour elle vole avec le drapeau des Forces armées canadiennes en guise de remerciement. C'est un honneur de représenter Canada et les Forces armées canadiennes ici même à la plage Juno. Et nous remercions nos hôtes de nous donner cette opportunité.
Tim, they are genuinely just above us. If I sort of lean out and try not to fall out of the tent.
Yeah.
That's remarkable. And staying very high still.
As our first jumpers come over the beach, you have a clear view of our signature Canadian flag canopies.
Coming down.
As our first jumpers come into land, please give
Right
up
behind
first
us.
formation
Lots of
with
applause
CBC
for them here.
solo flag. S'il vous plaît, applaudissez notre première formation d'été canadienne.
Right past the dunes, directly onto the beach.
Yep.
Okay, that's amazing. That's
great
amazing.
to see, and another form of commemoration, I guess.
Absolutely.
Right? This is there's always a small element of spectacle here, and yet I think everyone knows why they're here, and but it's okay to enjoy ourselves a little bit. I think that's a part of this. There's a balance, isn't there? A tension.
And everyone will see it differently. I mean, you heard people cheering and applauding. You know the veterans are also watching that.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like it must be a very different experience for them. And again, I feel so lucky that we've had a chance to speak with some of them. So has Margaret Evans, our senior international correspondent, who is also with us this morning. Margaret, I know you have been spending some time with the vets who've come on this trip, asking them about the world that they changed 80 years ago. What are you hearing from them?
Well, a lot of stories, Adrienne, as you say, a lot of them about how their uniforms used to attract women back in the day, but of course sobering up pretty quickly when they said, when you get to the battlefield, all of that changes. Nobody that I spoke to would accept the badge of being a hero. The memories are about what they went through, and particularly the people, the comrades that they lost in the field. But one of the other things that I really picked up on was that most of them are carrying a really very, very heavy sense of responsibility on their shoulders. And I know that there is one veteran that you and I both spoke to, former Captain Bill Wilson. He was a sea gunner on D-Day. Have a listen to what he had to say when we were talking about the war and the responsibility of being a veteran of that war mean to him.
We knew what we volunteered for. We knew what could happen. And we remember what our fathers did in the First World War, so we just followed on. Would that happen again? Because Canada has changed so dramatically. And I know what they did. I know how they did it. Canadians don't. That hurts. So.
One of the things, Adrienne, that Bill said, acknowledged, is he said he believes this will be his last time to visit these beaches that have meant so much in his life and so much to the history of our country. He said that the worry is that what happened then and the connection to what those young men were and women were fighting for will be lost when that generation goes. And that was a fear that every veteran that I spoke to said out loud, somewhat at odds with all of the commemorations that we're seeing around of their service. But the fear is that when they're gone, they won't be remembered, and that what happened, the importance of the war, is not being taught properly in schools in countries like Canada.
I guess it's our job, Margaret, to reassure them that we're not going to forget them. Captain Bill, we went to visit him in High River, Alberta. He's a few months shy of 99, but he's basically a little kid at heart. And I know this has been a pretty important week for him. Margaret, this week, obviously we've been talking about the past, but it's clear, how worried he is about the present and the future. What in particular is it that you think these vets are worried about?
Well, I think there's a real sense, maybe not just amongst veterans today, but amongst the world, that some of the ideals, the sense of security that people feel that World War II achieved for Europe, for the rest of the world, the sense of unity in Europe is actually under threat. As we speak, European Union elections, voters are voting for a European Parliament, and a number of countries are seeing a rise in support for the extreme right, including here in France. So that's a worry. They're worried about the potential of a return to the stage of Donald Trump as the next U.S. president. They're worried that that could break that transatlantic alliance that was solidified during the First and Second World War. They worry that it could undermine NATO, that there won't be the same kind of support for NATO. So these are the kinds of things that they're worrying about. And of course, you have to remember that there is war again in Europe. A decade ago, at these D-Day commemoration ceremonies to mark the 70th anniversary, you had the presence of the Russian President Vladimir Putin here. Now, he was invited to come just months after annexing Crimea. A decade later, he's not invited for obvious reasons, because in 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. But there are many people, many critics who say if the West had understood the threat, the potential threat of that annexation and had reacted stronger back then, we might not be seeing war in Europe again. Those right now, and those are the kinds of concerns that people are worried about. And you're hearing the veterans talk about it too. They're worried about the world that they've left behind. Were those sacrifices they made in vain? We're expecting to hear from world leaders today. They're going to all pay lip service to the importance of the fight for democracy. But the question people are asking themselves is, well, how far are you really going or prepared to go to fight for democracy and freedom today, given the threats facing the old, it seems to be old world security order that was born out of the Second World War and assured people for what they believed at the time would be peace, the last war. Obviously, that hasn't been the case, and these are the things that the veterans are thinking about as they remember what they went through.
All right. Margaret, thank you very much. Appreciate that. We'll be talking a little later. As everyone, as we were listening to Margaret, you could see on part of the screen, Justin Trudeau has arrived. Prince William, I believe, is also here. Charles Michel, the President of the European Council, is here. The French Prime Minister is arriving as well. So we're going to hear from them soon. Certainly, we will both see and hear from some of the veterans. And while we wait for that part of the ceremony to begin, let's hear from another one of our veterans. So as you're getting closer and closer, was there anything you were keeping an eye on the shore, aside from the horror?
Yeah, there's a building there, and it's, today we call it, we do, soldiers, the Queen's Own
rifles?
Yeah, and it stands out. It's
Canada House.
That's where we go now when we go on holidays. Why the Germans didn't destroy that. It stood out amongst everything there.
So you kept your eyes on that house?
Yeah.
And so as you get closer to shore and it's your turn to go ashore, what was that like?
I was all nervous. I was all excited about this until the Germans opened fire, and then everything happens at once. It's just like a dream.
Was it slow like a dream?
No, fast. Everything was fast.
George Couture of Calgary, this is a fantastic man. Last year he went to the Legion for D-Day and there really wasn't anybody there. And so he told his daughter that he really wanted to be standing on the beach in front of Canada House on the 80th anniversary, and that is exactly what he is planning to do. If you haven't been to Canada House, please go. It is a living, loving tribute to the scale of sacrifice of the Canadians on D-Day. And I learned something interesting there. And if you will allow me a little show and tell. Can you see these sticks here? The French locals used to call them red spaghetti, if you will, because it looks like red spaghetti. This would be like macaroni, bucatini, and this is linguine. But actually, these are explosives. This is hardened cordite. It was used to pack the shells. And the reason why I'm grab this here is because all these years later, it still gets washed up when the tide is high. This stuff still lands on the beach of Juno Beach. The history is alive here. If you grab this, don't set fire to it. We did that at Canada House with the owner of Canada House. I think we have the pictures of it. That's Nicole Hoffer there, who owns the house, lighting the cordite in the fireplace, and it burns. It burns fast. It is 80 years later, after being in the sea for all this time, washing up on the shore even now, it still burns. It's still and explosive. I am not bringing this home with me, Tim. I know better than that.
Yeah. You know, if I can, to me, it's this material culture.
Yes.
It's 80 years. You're holding history in your hands. At the War Museum where I work, we have this material, helmets, medals. It's the stories of the past. And I think there's probably a metaphor here in some way that the sand holds the memory of this place. The people hold it. Canada House, which is so important. Queen's Own Rifles of Canada storming ashore, their comrades being cut down around them. But they see this house, and they say it's the first house liberated in France. If you go there today, it is just covered with Canadian flags, as you know. And so very, very much one of the symbols, and there are so many symbols here, but one of the symbols of liberation.
And as we talk, again, there are more paratroopers landing really quickly right on Juno Beach. And again, the feeling of this, as you said, you know, the applause, it's a spectacle. And what you're talking about, the tangible nature of history, isn't lost on me, that as they land on that beach itself, we know that a Canadian war photographer scooped up some of that sand some years ago, sent it to a physicist to have them look at it. And what was in the sand but hardened steel, manganese, from the artillery shells of D-Day. It is now a fundamental part of the sand that exists right now. So the history, I know it is really sad and really hard that we are losing the veterans. And I've heard them say how afraid they are that we will forget. But all of these things, all of these touch points, all of these people tell me I think we're going to be okay.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to forget. I can understand why a veteran would be worried about that, having seen so many of his or her comrades passed away. We shouldn't forget the 50,000 women who served in uniform for Canada.
I'm just going to name check. Mary Owen, Elsa Lessard, if those women are watching, they were code breakers. You are remarkable Canadians. We are grateful for your service, and you're good humans.
Yeah. This is a special day, and there's history all around us here. But back in Canada, there's history as well, and it's in the lifeblood of Canadians. And we may talk more about that, but we just heard that young lady talk about the emotions of following in her grandfather's footsteps. Well, there are millions and millions of Canadians who have a link to this war, because of course we had 1 million veterans who came back, and they built this country. And so I don't think when we lose that last veteran, we will lose something important. We will lose an eyewitness to history, but we will continue on. I think that's part of our debt.
We will. I wouldn't mind going into the crowd now and listening to Julia Wong, who is there with people. Julia?
Hi, Adrienne. So we've been in the crowd talking to lots of different people from all over the country, but I want to introduce you to someone who I've just very recently met. This is Richard Janai. He's the Minister of Sport and Youth for the Red River Métis government, and they have a delegation of 34 people here attending the ceremonies. And while the delegation has come here in the past, this is actually Richard's first time. You were telling me what it was like to be here, to walk on Juno Beach earlier.
It was so overwhelming, like this. I only seen it on TV and I read about it in books and learned about it in school, but to actually be here and step on a beach where so many Red River Métis, you could say they were youth, gave up their lives for the war, the Great War.
And you mentioned that these youth, there are 12 youth who are between the ages of 15 to 29. They're all here to soak all this in, do a project afterwards. What are you hoping they get out of this?
I'm hoping that we'll get the message that we're getting from the Métis veterans and the elders, that never forget the sacrifices that their forefathers, grandfathers did. They came here and do, and then serving for their country, because we never want to forget our Métis, our Red River Métis veterans and men that came to fight in the war and gave up the ultimate sacrifice and giving up their lives.
That's right. We never want to, as you mentioned, fail to recognize those who sacrificed so much for our country. Tell me, what do you hope Canadians remember, what they get out of the Métis people's involvement in the Second World War?
they get that we were here, and we were here in numbers. We volunteered in great numbers. There's stories of gentlemen walking hundreds of miles to enlist through forests, going on canoe, just so that they could enlist and be part of the wars, to be part of this country, this great country of Canada that we live in.
All right, thank you so much, Richard. That's Richard Janai, the Minister of Sport and Youth for the Red River Métis government. Back to you.
Thank you, Julie, and our thanks to Richard as well. 32 Indigenous soldiers are buried at Bény-sur-Mer with their comrades they fought with here in Normandy. It was, by the way, a CBC reporter, Matthew Halton, who was reporting from these beaches on D-Day. He came in with the troops, and in the decades since, CBC has always sought out the men who fought there to pull out their memories, and their recollections never lose the power to help the rest of us try to feel what they went through. So here is some of what they told us over the years.
It was a mixed mood. Some people were exhilarated, quite a few. Some people were pensive.
Well, I tell you, I was quite scared.
We knew that some of us were going to die. You're thinking about your folks at home, you're thinking about the friends you're with, and you just wonder, what makes the world go round?
It was the only chance we'd had to take the beach, and the only chance for the Allies to win the war. This was it. So we went in prepared. If we had to die, we'd die, and lots of our boys did.
Freddie Harris, first out of our craft, never got out of the water. Johnny Gibson, my corporal, never got out of the water. Fred Eamon, rifleman, never got out of the water.
It's just one of those famous moments in your life that you reach up. And I'm not a religious man that much, but it's just one of those times.
Some of these guys, you're closer to those guys than you are to your own family.
As one of my chums said, Dan, he said, I prayed, but he said, this time I meant it. And I'll never forget that as long as I live, sorry. And he was one of my best friends.
It's important to keep listening to those voices. I just want to draw your attention to what you're seeing on the screen. The ceremony is starting really in earnest. We now know that the veterans have been seated. We've seen some familiar faces. There are so few of them now that when you see them, you know their names, you know their faces, you know their stories. They're representing so many of their friends. And of course, we are losing so many D-Day veterans to time. This last week, we lost one more. William, Bill, to friends, Bill Cameron, was on a flotilla of ships escorting American troops to Omaha Beach on D-Day. He intended to come here today. His bags were packed. They were in his house. But on the day he was supposed to leave, he suddenly passed away. He was 100 years old. Certainly his daughter, Donna, was ready to come with him. And they were very much looking forward to being here. And I think about what it means when you have so few veterans left to lose one.
Yeah.
On the day he's supposed to fly here.
It feels like a tragic story, doesn't it? But it reminds us maybe of the fragility of anybody who's 100 years old. It's not easy to travel, and I think, we don't have exact numbers, do we? But it's fewer than 10,000 Second World War veterans still here from 1.1 million. So we are on the razor's edge, and we will lose them in the next 5, 6, 7 years. And that will be a moment for Canada to mark
Indeed.
And to bear witness to.
This is a moment. We are watching the different branches of the service take vigil. Is that the correct phrasing for what's happening here?
This is an important event for the Canadian Armed Forces, and I think for all of us to reflect on.
These people represent the different branches of the service.
That's right.
Very soon, you will see more people start to arrive. The Canadian Armed Forces Guard and Band will begin to play, and then we will start to hear from some of the dignitaries. And the way this day will flow is Once they've spoken, they will then greet the veterans. There will be a number of inspections, royal salutes. We will hear from knowledge keepers. There will be a number of performances. And then probably the most special moment is when the veterans return to the beach. That will be towards the end.
We will now be joined on stage by 3 students from McMaster University from the province of Ontario. They'll be holding a Canadian Remembrance Torch. The torch is our national symbol of gratitude for peace and for freedom. We, as Canadians, value our military, and every day is a Remembrance Day.
Nous allons maintenant être rejoints sur scène par 3 étudiants de l'Université de McMaster de la province de l'Ontario. Ils tiendront la torche du souvenir du Canada. La torche est notre symbole national de gratitude pour la paix et la liberté. En tant que Canadiens, nous accordons une grande importance à nos militaires et chaque jour est un jour de souvenir.
The torch is on a 10-day tour through Europe and attended events at Bretteville-sur-Lez and Benny-sur-Mer. The tour will continue later this week with events in the Netherlands. I would like to invite the students who have designed and constructed the torch to the stage. Please welcome Greg D'Souza, Vanessa Ho, and Kyle D'Souza.
La torche est traitée une tournée de 10 jours en Europe et a participé à des événements à Bretteville-sur-Lez et Benny-sur-Mer. La tournée continue au courant de la semaine avec des événements aux Pays-Bas. J'aimerais inviter sur scène les étudiants qui ont conçu et
So you might be wondering, what are they talking about when they talk about this torch? It is a national symbol of gratitude, really, for peace and freedom. It's been redesigned over the years. This is a project that McMaster students, the people you're looking at right here, have undertaken. Let's listen for a moment.
For the registered charity, the Canadian Remembrance Torch. The torch serves year-round in Canada and overseas as the country's national symbol of gratitude for peace and freedom. On May 10th, the torch began its Echoes of Gratitude tour in Ottawa to honor those who served in the Second World War and raise awareness of D-Day's 80th anniversary. Following a statement in Parliament, the Canadian Remembrance Torch was lit from the Centennial Flame on Parliament Hill by Second World War veteran John Priest, who is here today, together with representatives from the French Embassy and the Canadian government. After a procession to the War Memorial, the torch's flame was put inside 2 travel lamps.
The torch visited Pearlie Health Center, where D-Day veteran Ronald Armitage, who is also here today, kicked off the special event.
If you get a
by
chance
wheeling into the
to
room,
look at this torch,
carrying the torch
it will have
to
doves
full
on it
blast.
for
The
peace and
Second
freedom. It
World
has
War
maple leaves, of
veteran
course, for Canada,
later
waves
gave the Canadian
representing the
Remembrance
water.
Torch a send-off to
A
Normandy,
vortex flame.
where they
I'm not
knew
even
it
sure.
would
I'm
travel
not
on their
being an
behalf.
engineering student. I'm not sure if
Canadian
that's the right term for that.
Remembrance Torch visited the Canadian War
But it
Museum
is
and
a symbol, but it's
D-Day
also
ceremonies
symbolic, Tim, of what we're talking about with remembrance and maintaining memory here.
Yeah, I think, isn't this interesting? We're a melding of the old and the new. We're seeing different elements of commemoration here and different ways, in this case, these young people trying to make a connection of remembrance. And I think we should applaud that. Of course, the torch, I think, is linked to John McCrae's famous poem in Flanders Fields, this idea of throwing the torch to the next generation. And so this is right on message here, and lovely to see these young people so passionate, I think, about keeping the memory and the flame of memory alive.
Torch honors our Second World War veterans here at Juno Beach Center. However, due to security rules, we cannot show you the special flame that has traveled from Canada to Normandy for this purpose. Tomorrow, the torch will journey to Caen, where it will continue to symbolize our gratitude for the gift of freedom and peace. Thank you. Merci.
Interesting point about the security. I mean, yes, it would have been, if you're ever going to show the flame, it should probably be on Juno Beach on the 80th anniversary of D-Day with veterans present. However,
you know, One of the interesting things that young guy said there is freedom, and I think this is something that that we're going to hear a lot today from veterans, from dignitaries, from prime ministers and presidents. It can be hard to remember 80 years ago what we were fighting for. These were Canadians, volunteers for the most part. They understood this was a fight against tyranny, against the Nazis, against the fascists. They understood this was a war that had to be won. And they paid a terrible sacrifice, and that echoes forward over time. And we in Canada, we've been relatively lucky. We haven't been invaded. We haven't generally had to fight many wars since the Second World War. It's our professional soldiers who do this. But these ideas of liberty, freedom, they matter. They mattered 80 years ago, and as we see in the world around us now, they matter still to this day.
They do. And they're fragile. They're as fragile now as they were then in different ways.
Yeah, yeah.
I think
Music, song, images, and an amazing performance by the We are honored to have been your hosts for the pre-show today. To be a part of this day will always have a special place in our hearts. We hope you enjoy the 80th anniversary of D-Day.
as we see these young people, again, let's not forget the veterans. Let's hear from another one of them right now.
I want to ask you about Juno Beach again. What's really important for you to do when you go there this time?
I guess one last time visit the graveyard and the Abbey. I'm from Winnipeg, and they're all Winnipeg Rifles. Lost 17 kids that were lined up and shot in the back of their heads by the Germans. I'll never forget that. Bastards.
And Captain Bill Wilson said that he needs to go to the cemetery again. He needs to go to the Abbey. He knows it will be his last time, but it's important for him to do that. I should tell you, all week as we've been talking about D-Day, I've been getting emails from people who have connections, and a man named Dan McKeel wrote to say that his uncle, Hollis, was one of those 17 Canadians who was executed at the Abbey.
It's a brutal story.
What a story that is.
Yeah, and it's one that Canadians should know. Of course, D-Day is crucial, but there's D+1 and D+2, and it continues on. We were fighting inward from here. Caen, which is only about 20 kilometers away, that was an objective. The Canadians run face first into the 12th SS Panzer Division. They were a Hitler Youth division, indoctrinated young guys, vicious fighters, and they took no prisoners. And these were our adversaries for much of the fighting. And in the first week, 156 Canadians were executed. They had been captured, overrun, and executed, and that's what a veteran was talking about there. I don't want to leave the impression that that's the only thing that's happening here. The Canadians were in fact holding off tank attacks. This was absolutely crucial because, of course, the German plan is to drive the Canadians back into the sea.
Right.
They didn't. The Canadians held there, and that is probably the most important fighting the Canadians will engage in. And yet it was absolutely brutal, kill or be killed. And that is something that we need to remember.
Absolutely. I think as we were talking, we got word that Julia Wong has met someone she'd like us to meet. So let's go over to Julia. Who's with you there?
Thanks, Adrienne. Yeah, we've been making some friends here in the public viewing area. I want to introduce you to two men from New Brunswick. We have Roger Robichaud and Steve Gravel. They are Legion members, but they also have connections to the North Shore Regiment, one of the first regiments to storm Juno Beach on D-Day. And Roger, you were telling me earlier your father was a part of the regiment. He was injured before D-Day, but I want to get your thoughts on what he would think of today's events.
He'd be really proud of the liberty that he brought. Sorry. Oh,
It's hard to explain a feeling. You have to feel it. That's all I can say. It's hard to explain a memory because those guys is trying to forget and we're asking to remember it. So that's the hardest part.
Open all wounds, and it's not easy, but the liberty cost a lot. So.
And what has it been like for you two to walk on these hallowed grounds these last few days?
Rough, really rough, because we lost good friends in different UN tours and different stuff that we had to do in the Canadian military, and it always brings you back to it.
Yeah, memories is always like that. I joined the Army in 1980 and as a Hammer Corps, and with the RCDs until 1986, and I remastered EMI in 86 to 88. And I was based in Gagetown in 1983. I went to Germany in 81, 82. So that was a good experience. It was peacetime, but it was as real as it was.
And Steve, you and I were chatting earlier. You were saying it's just hard to describe everything that you've been feeling over the last little while. Tell me more about that.
Well, it's hard to explain because it's coming out of nowhere, so you don't know why, but it's just a feeling, you know. It's really hard to explain because you've been training for it. I haven't been during the wartime, but because of the training, I know what they were feeling. Yeah, they done so much. The other day I was at the Abbey with the Canadian that was slaughtered. It just came out. Every time I think about it, it's coming up.
It's rough. Sorry. And I got a friend that made these pins, which is end of mission. We call it because I was started as a gunner, and end of mission means that we're retired from doing our mission. And we, if you look at it, there's an eye. Whoops, sorry. And there's a blood coming out of it. That's because of all the people that we lose.
And you know, so many people have talked about how this milestone anniversary is poignant because we're just seeing fewer and fewer veterans that are with us. What does it mean to you to be here in the presence of these 13 veterans who have come from Canada?
It's an honor.
It's an honor.
It's an honor. That's all. We're here to remember them. We're here to
not get forgotten.
Yeah.
And that's very important, not forget the past, because past will always come back. So we got to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Very wise words. Thank you so much, both, for your time. Roger Robichaud, Steve Gravel, Legion members from New Brunswick who have come here to remember those who were with the North Shore Regiment who landed here on Juno Beach 80 years ago. Adrienne.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you to Roger and Steve. The North Shore Regiment, the hell they went through.
Yeah, the furthest part of Juno Beach, probably about 8 kilometers from where we are here, but fighting through very hard defenses. And then when they got off the beach, the Germans had underground bunkers, and they had to clear out these underground bunkers in vicious 3-4 hours of fighting in the darkness. Really a different fighting experience, but they took their objectives that day, and we heard from some of the descendants there the emotion I think that they displayed here, both for what their fathers and grandfathers did, but what the regiment did as well.
I'm just looking at the other side of the screen. His back is turned to us, but that's Prince William, who is here speaking with Justin Trudeau. We'll hear from both of them soon. I'd sure love to know what that conversation is about.
Right, yeah. You know, there are a lot of these conversations happening, and these are probably two of the more prominent. But behind us, we see young people talking. We see others who are here on tours, and I think there's a coming together happening here. It's somber at times, celebratory at other times. We are thinking of the veterans, but you and I have had a few days here to walk around and to talk to people. And one of my most powerful experiences was to to visit Benny-sur-Mer, where 2,000 Canadians are buried, and to walk those headstones, the maple leaf there, the names, the regiments, the ages, 19, 20, 21, and gut-wrenching for me, the epitaphs, which their families chose, the names, how to remember a loved one. Some turn to scripture, some to poetry, some simply say, we miss you. And I think that is something to reflect on, the terrible cost of liberation.
One of the things that struck me was just about 150 meters to my right within the Juno Beach Center. There are a series of letters that were written by the families who had lost their sons.
Right.
And they were written to the French families. And one of the letters said something to the effect of, I saw in my local newspaper that French families are looking after the graves of the Canadians who died. Would you please care for the grave of our only son?
Yeah.
Here's what his grave marker is. Thank you. And these short, stark letters. So to send that letter is extraordinary. But to then see, and here's one of the letters now, but to then realize that the families who received those letters said, absolutely, it is our duty, and we will make this our family's obligation. And they still, generations of these families still tend to those graves. I'm
It's
feeling
astonishing,
emotional
isn't
talking
it?
about it.
Yeah.
Tend to those graves as if they were their children.
Yes, the French, the Belgians, the Dutch, they do this for the Canadian graves because there are so many Canadians buried here in cemeteries that are cared for by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, but also by local French, Belgian, Dutch people. And you're exactly right. So poignant, so powerful. Think about those families. Think about that grief. How did they find out? We had almost 400 Canadians killed on this day, but there were hundreds killed the next day, and the next day, and the next day. It continued on. Canadians killed in the air while fighting at sea. And all of those families back in Canada getting those dreaded telegrams, often saying, we regret to inform you. Very clinical, very lacking emotion. And here they were, finally understanding that a father, a son, a brother was never going to come home. That is a part of this day that we should acknowledge as well.
And those who did come home came home different. And we've heard that from a number of the veterans, including one you're about to hear from now. When you came home eventually, after that battle, did people say, hey, what was it like? Or was it something that you just sort of moved on?
Well, when we got back, I always called it the year of the lost souls. You come in where everybody's kill or be killed, and lots of noise, and you come home, everything's quiet and peaceful, you hope.
Did that silence feel like peace to you?
Well, it's sort of it was hard to get adjusted, you know. That's why I called it the year of the lost souls. So they're all around beer parlors and sort of in a way that's a good way of ventilating, you know.
Yeah.
Getting their problems out, you're talking it out with your friends.
You needed each other.
Yeah.
That is the amazing Jim Parks. What a man he is.
Yes.
His quotes are all over the walls of the Juno Beach.
99 years old, landed on D-Day with his brother. Both of them survived. But as he said, they're returning back to Canada. I think he used the word year of lost souls. Isn't that powerful? We had, of course, 45,000 Canadians killed in the war, but 55,000 were wounded in body and mind. But many of those veterans who didn't suffer physical wounds, they came back and they were lost. They were treated well by the state for the most part, but having come from the war zone, kill or be killed, as he said, to return home, that was a difficult transition, and you know, we're much better at that today with our men and women in the Canadian Armed Forces, but we've had to learn some difficult lessons.
Having said that, yes, we're better at it, but I find it interesting that, firstly, the age, I think, of the Canadian soldiers are a little bit older than some of the Americans and Brits, but also there was more attention paid to their psychological needs than some of the other services in the UK or the US. That there seemed to be an understanding that what the Canadians had been through in the First World War, and what these young men, what their fathers had been through, had already left a scar. Yeah. And that there was an obligation to try to.
Yeah, we had something called the Veterans Charter, which is a series of programs to integrate veterans back into society. We sent 45,000 veterans to university. I was speaking to a veteran here. He was 101 years old. He said the most important thing for him was that the state paid for him to go to university, and he had a life that went on there. Most Canadians came back and had jobs. And so we were a thriving economy. We were moving forward. And that too is a lesson from the Second World War and a powerful legacy. We were industrialized, we became more North American, more outward facing, joining things like NATO, and yet all of that comes back to our significant contributions during the war.
But those experiences weren't the same for Indigenous veterans.
They were not, and we should acknowledge that, that not all veterans, receive the same rights. Indigenous veterans especially, often because they were on isolated reserves, and so they weren't told about what was open to them in terms of education. There was also the Indian agents who act as almost gatekeepers to ensure that Indigenous veterans couldn't receive some of those benefits. So that's an important qualifier.
We are watching, I believe, the Canadian Armed Forces Guard and Band, which means we are getting close to hearing from the Prime Minister, the Prince of Wales, and the French Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, speak and connect with the troops. Let's just listen for a moment.
Advance. Move! Turn!
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our dignitaries. Mesdames et messieurs, veuillez accueillir nos distingués invités. The Right Honorable Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada. Le très honorable Justin Trudeau, Premier ministre du Canada. His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales. Son Altesse.
Front right, steady! Center right, steady! Rear right, steady! Guard, steady!
Fais gaffe, une ligne droite.
Guard! Stand at ease! Stand easy.
So just as we wait for things to begin, I can tell you that the veterans are all seated in the front row. And what you're looking at there now, the grass, it's just at the edge of the dunes of Juno Beach. So it's a little hard to see the sea. It's a little hard to see the beach, but you're just going to have to trust me when I tell you that it is just less than 100 meters away from where they are standing. The veterans, of course, are all seated right in the front row there. So the HMCS William Hall is right there. You can appreciate that there are services and ceremonies all along this stretch of the Normandy coast at Utah.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our dignitaries. Mesdames et messieurs, veuillez accueillir nos distingués invités. The Right Honorable Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada. Le très honorable Justin Trudeau, Premier ministre du Canada, His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, Son Altesse Royale, le Prince de Galles, the Prime Minister of the Republic of France, Gabriel Attal, le Premier ministre de la République française, Gabriel Attal.
That is Justin Trudeau meeting Richard Romer, Lieutenant General Richard Romer. An incredible man. He is about 101.
Yeah, and just
Please
a
rise
storied
for the
career
royal.
and a
Veuillez
lawyer
vous lever
and
pour le
a
salut
writer.
royal.
Astonishing.
Parade! Roll salute! Salute! Parade! Attention!
So that is Prince of Wales inspecting the troops. You know, we heard
He himself is a veteran, of course, has
Absolutely.
served many years as a helicopter pilot and other branches of the British Armed Forces. And this must mean something special for him as well, as a veteran, as one who has understood and worn the uniform. And here he is speaking to various members.
Also, there's the family history. I mean, his a great-grandfather, his grandfather,
Yeah. They've all served.
They have indeed.
Yeah.
There are diaries from King George VI on D-Day. There are pictures with Montgomery. I mean, this soil matters to them too.
That's it. And you know, the veterans who are here, this must thrill them because so deeply entwined during the Second World War, the monarchy, and I've read letters and diaries of those who served, and occasionally they would see a member of the royal family, and just it really resonates with them. So I imagine if we could speak to those veterans now, this would be a thrilling part of the ceremony for them.
And you can see on your screen there, that is King Charles, who is speaking at the British ceremony.
Right.
That is happening. There were two British beaches, Gold and Sword. Both beaches named after fish. So goldfish, swordfish. This initially was supposed to be jellyfish, but
Yes.
Churchill decided that really wasn't very dignified.
I'm very pleased. There's many things I think Churchill should be remembered for, but Juno Beach is much better.
Ce mémorial rend également un hommage particulier. Parade! To the national anthem. Salute!
Arriving from the sea is the CC-132J Hercules. L'avion pour quoi y arriver est un avion de transport Hercule CC.
So the fly pass that you're seeing is from the 436 Squadron from Trenton, the C-130s. You've seen one go by. There are more on their way. So this ceremony is about to begin, and when it does in earnest, we will step back and we will listen and enjoy this with you.
Distingués invités, chers anciens combattants, mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. Soyez les bienvenus à la plage Juno pour souligner ensemble le 80e anniversaire du jour J. Mon nom est Geneviève Paris. Je suis officière des affaires publiques pour les Forces armées canadiennes et je suis honorée de vous accompagner pour cette cérémonie. Distinguished guests, dear veterans, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We are here today at Juno Beach to mark the 80th anniversary of D-Day. I am Geneviève Paris, Public Affairs Officer for the Canadian Armed Forces, and I am honored to guide you for this ceremony. Nous avons le privilège d'avoir parmi nous des vétérans du jour J, de la bataille de Normandie et de la Seconde Guerre mondiale. C'est avec respect et admiration qu'ils sont accueillis aujourd'hui. We are honored to have with us veterans of D-Day, the Battle of Normandy, and the Second World War. It is with great respect and admiration that we welcome you today. Et maintenant, M. Morley Littleton, gardien du savoir de la Première Nation Kwajalein en Saskatchewan, au Canada, vous présentera les chants Treaty for Flag Song and the Victory Song. Il sera accompagné par sa fille, Chelsea Machiskinik. Ensemble, ils font partie des cris Spirit Singer. Mr. Morley Littleton is a knowledge keeper from Kwajalein First Nation in Saskatchewan, Canada. He will now perform the Treaty for Our Flag Song and the Victory Song. He will be assisted by his daughter, Shelby Machiskinik, and together they are part of the Cree Spirit Singer. I would now like to introduce our first act of the ceremony, Morgan Grace and Mitchell McCombs. Morgan Grace is Red River Métis fiddle player from East Selkirk, Manitoba, Canada. Musical talent aside, Morgan Grace has a special connection to Juno Beach, as her great uncle, Mr. Roddy Monkman, Second World War veteran, traveled to Juno Beach in 2009 as part of the Métis Veterans Delegation. Morgan Grace is accompanied by guitarist Michel McCoons. Michel is a multi-instrumentist from Brandon, Manitoba, Canada. He has a deep connection to his Ojibwe and Métis roots. Together, they will perform the Teardrop Waltz and the Medicine Line. J'aimerais maintenant présenter notre premier acte de la cérémonie, Morgan Grace and Michel McCoons. Morgan Grace est violoniste métisse de la Rivière-Rouge à Selkirk, Manitoba, au Canada. Mis à part son talent musical, Morgan Grace a un lien spécial avec Juno Beach, car son grand-oncle, M. Ronnie Monkman, vétéran de la Seconde Guerre mondiale, s'est rendu à Juno Beach en 2009 dans le cadre d'une délégation d'anciens combattants métis. Morgan Grace est accompagné du guitariste Michel McCoons. Michel est un multi-instrumentiste de Brandon, Manitoba. Il a un lien profond avec ses racines Ojibwe et métisses. Ensemble, ils joueront la valse Teardrop et la ligne de médecine. S'il vous plaît, veuillez accueillir, please welcome, Morgan Grace and Michel McCoons. Mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, veuillez accueillir, please welcome, le très honorable Justin Trudeau, Premier ministre du Canada. The Right Honorable Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada.
Chers vétérans de la Seconde Guerre mondiale,
Dear veterans
Votre
of the
Altesse
Second
Royale,
World War,
Premier ministre Attal,
Your Royal
Président
Highness,
Michel du
Prime
Conseil
Minister
européen,
Adele, President Michel
chers amis,
of the European Council,
c'est un grand honneur
dear
pour moi
friends,
d'être ici avec vous
it is a great
aujourd'hui
honor for me to be here with you
le
today
80e anniversaire
to mark
du jour
the
J
80th
de la
anniversary
bataille de Normandie.
of D-Day and the Battle
80
of
years
Normandy.
ago, more than 14,000 Canadians landed at Juno Beach among the roughly 150,000 Allied forces who came ashore in Normandy. These soldiers had friends and family. They had lives and jobs before the war started. On the battlefields, Francophones, Anglophones, Indigenous peoples, and new Canadians came together as one. Brave Canadians like you sacrificed everything for our freedom. There are no words to describe the immensity of the debt we owe you. Il y a 5 ans, lors du 75e
5 years
et au
ago,
cours des années,
at the 75th anniversary, and over the years,
nombreux d'entre
I had a chance to
Chaque
meet
fois,
with many of you.
je suis touché
Every
par votre
time,
candeur et votre
I am
humilité,
touched by
sachant que vous avez
your
tellement
humility,
donné à votre pays.
knowing that you
Vous avez
gave
sauvé
so
le
much
monde.
to your country.
Et nous vous
You
en
saved the
serons
world.
toujours reconnaissants.
And we will be forever
age
grateful to you for that.
99. Private William Seafried, who's with us today, enjoys playing bridge with friends multiple times a week. Half of all the people he knows, so he of all people knows how fragile life is, so he's enjoying every second of it. He knows how fragile life is because while in combat, a grenade landed at his feet. He was only 21, and he said, "Not today." So he picked up the grenade and swiftly threw it back. Le sapeur Léopold Thibault, qui est aussi avec nous aujourd'hui,
And
s'était enrôlé
Leopold Thibault is
à
also with us
Rimouski quand
today.
il y avait un peu plus de 20 ans.
He was
en
in Rimouski
1941.
and enrolled there
Il a
in
servi en
1941.
Grande-Bretagne, en France, en
He served
Belgique,
in Great Britain,
en
in
Hollande,
France, in
où
Belgium,
il a travaillé sur les
and
ponts
in
Bailey,
Holland,
des ponts
where he worked
préfabriqués
on
portatifs
the
pour permettre aux
Bailey
Alliés
Bridge,
d'avancer
the
plus rapidement.
portable bridges that would allow the Allies to advance more quickly. The efforts made by soldiers like him created bridges between Canada and all the countries who are now among our best friends and allies.
The Allied High Command decided that the coast of Normandy would be the target of the amphibious assault on the continent. Canadian infantry and armored troops were assigned a landing zone of their own, right here at Juno Beach. It was a testament to the esteem held for Canadian soldiers that a country with such a relatively small population would be given such an important role in Operation Overlord. And Canadians proved up to the task. On this day, 80 years ago, Canadian troops progressed further inland than any of our allies. It was a remarkable achievement and a costly one, too. 359 Canadiens
359 Canadians lost their lives on the day of the landings. We will remember them.
We remember your sacrifice. We remember your stories. Il est de notre responsabilité à tous
We have all a responsibility to continue to share those stories so that future generations do not forget the heroism and the courage that it took to defend our freedoms and to remember the dangers and the horrors of war.
Honorary Lieutenant General Richard Romer, who turned 100 this year and who is also with us today, is one of Canada's most decorated veterans. Over the decades, he's participated in and organized many commemoration events. In his words, the costly D-Day success at Juno Beach laid the unforeseeable foundation for the betterment of mankind. It is important for him that we never forget. So to General Romer, to Sergeant Armitage, who couldn't be here with us today, to able seaman Bill Cameron, who sadly passed away just last weekend. When I spoke with her a few days ago, his daughter Donna told me just how much he'd been looking forward to being here with all of you. His bags have been packed for weeks, and he was so proud to be coming back to Normandy. So for him, and for all the veterans, I can promise you that Canada and the world will keep commemorating this significant day for decades and generations to come. En plus de se remémorer vos histoires, il est de notre devoir
in addition to remembering your stories, we all have a duty to remind future generations of the principles for which you fought: freedom, democracy, justice.
Didn't happen by accident, and it won't continue without effort. Democracy is still under threat today. It is threatened by aggressors who want to redraw borders. It is threatened by demagoguery, misinformation, disinformation, foreign interference. We must all continue to stand for democracy day in and day out. We owe it to future generations, and we owe it to the great women and men in uniform who sacrificed so much for our collective freedom, lest we forget. Merci.
Mesdames et Messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great honor that I introduce the delegation of D-Day and the Second World War veterans. Je vais maintenant présenter la délégation d'anciens combattants du jour J et de la Seconde Guerre mondiale. Mr. William Seyfried, Monsieur Léopold Thibault, Mr. Jim Parks, Mr. John Preece, Mr. William Wilson, Mr. George Couture, Mr. Russell Monroe, Mr. Joseph Maxwell, Madame Annie McNamara, Mr. Howard McNamara, Mr. Charles Davis, Mr. Jim Spence, and Honorary Lieutenant General, Lieutenant General Honoraire, Richard Romer. We are honored to have this delegation with here today on Juno Beach. Nous sommes honorés d'avoir cette délégation avec nous aujourd'hui à la plage Juno Beach. Et maintenant, veuillez accueillir une incontournable de la chanson québécoise, Cœur de pirate, And now, please welcome singer-songwriter Cœur de Pirate with her song Crier tout bas.
Je t'ai vu tracer le long du paysage une ligne des aimés qui détruisent ton langage. Et quand tu chantais plus fort dans ton silence, je voyais les larmes couler toujours à contresens. Mais quand les saisons attendront ton retour, ce sera le vent qui portera secours. Et si la terre est sombre, et si la pluie te noie, raconte-moi qu'on puisse trembler ensemble. Et si le jour ne vient pas dans la nuit des perdus, raconte-moi qu'on puisse crier tout bas. J'ai voulu calmer ton rire qui s'étouffait, des courses vers le vide, ton rire qui soupirait. Si tu mets le cap vers des eaux restant troubles, je serai le phare qui te guidera toujours. Mais quand les saisons attendront ton retour, ce sera le vent qui portera secours. Et si la terre est sombre, et si la pluie te noie, raconte-moi qu'on puisse trembler ensemble. Et si le jour ne vient pas dans la nuit des perdus, raconte-moi qu'on puisse crier tout bas. Et si la terre est sombre, et si la pluie te noie, raconte-moi qu'on puisse trembler ensemble. Et si le jour ne vient pas dans la nuit des perdus, raconte-moi qu'on puisse crier tout bas, crier tout bas.
Mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, veuillez accueillir, please welcome, Son Altesse Royale, le Prince de Galles, His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister Trudeau, Prime Minister Attal, veterans and distinguished guests. Bonjour, Premier Ministre Trudeau, Premier Ministre Attal,
Prime Minister
veterans
Trudeau, Prime
et
Minister
distingués
Attal,
invités.
veterans and
I'm honoured to
distinguished
join
guests.
you to commemorate the bravery and sacrifice of the Canadian troops who gave so much 80 years ago. On June the 6th, 1944, as part of the 150,000 Allied troops that landed or parachuted into Normandy, 14,000 were from Canada. Far from home, they stormed these very sand dunes behind me, shoulder to shoulder with thousands of British troops. Standing here today in peaceful silence, it is almost impossible to grasp the courage it would have taken to run into the fury of battle that very day. The assault on D-Day remains the most ambitious military operation in history. The events of that windy, grey day ultimately led to the liberation of Europe, but it came at a heavy cost. We continue to honor every Canadian who gave so much, every Canadian family who lost a loved one, every Canadian who lived with the scars of battle, both physical and mental. I want to thank you, our veterans, for your extraordinary acts of bravery and sacrifice on Juno Beach and the liberation of Europe. All of you demonstrated heroism and determination that ensured fascism was conquered. The commitment to service displayed by Canadian troops is a great testament to the strength of the people of Canada. Canada and the UK continue to stand side by side, as we did in 1944, just as strong together 80 years later. Ensuring the memory of those who fought for freedom lives on is why we've come together again today, to say thank you. Thank you for our freedom, and thank you for your service. Merci pour notre liberté, et merci pour votre service.
Thank you for our freedom, and thank you for your service.
Mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, veuillez accueillir, please welcome, le Premier ministre de la République française, Gabriel Attal, the Prime Minister of the French Republic, Gabriel Attal.
Votre Altesse royale, Monsieur le Premier ministre,
Your Royal Highness,
Monsieur le Président
Prime
du
Minister,
Conseil européen, Monsieur le Président
President
du Sénat,
of the European Council,
Mesdames et Messieurs
President of
les
the
ministres,
Senate, ladies and
Monsieur le
gentlemen,
Préfet,
ministers,
Mesdames et Messieurs les parlementaires
Miss
et les élus,
Prefect, parliamentarians
les ambassadeurs,
and elected officials,
Mesdames et Messieurs
ladies
les
and
officiers
gentlemen
généraux,
ambassadors,
officiers,
ladies and gentlemen general
officiers
officers,
mariniers, soldats, matelots et aviateurs,
soldiers,
Mesdames et Messieurs
sailors
les
and
combattants
aviators,
du débarquement,
ladies and
chers
gentlemen,
vétérans, Mesdames et
D-Day veterans, ladies and
C'était
gentlemen.
l'aurore, ce matin du 6 juin.
It was
C'était
at
l'aurore.
dawn on the
Le
morning
vent
of June
soufflait
6th.
encore et la houle
It was
semblait toucher le
it was dawn. The wind
C'était l'aurore.
was still
Et
blowing,
en ce matin du
and
6
it
juin,
was dawn. And on
la
that
tempête
morning,
se calmait
on June
à peine.
6th,
Mais rien ne
the
résiste à l'appel de la
storm was
liberté.
still raging.
Il est 7h35.
But there came the call to
La
freedom.
bataille
It was
suprême commence.
7:35.
Malgré les flots
The supreme
déchaînés.
battle began in
En
spite
quelques heures,
of
ici même,
the
15 000
what was
Canadiens de la
occurring.
3e division d'infanterie,
15,000
commandée par le
Canadians
major-général Rodney
from the
Keller
3rd
et de la
Division
2e brigade blindée, appuyée
under
par
Commander
6 000
McKellar,
Britanniques,
supported by
déferlent sur
6,000
Juno Beach.
British soldiers,
Face à eux,
surged
les
onto
mines qui
Juno
explosent,
Beach.
les tirs,
There were mines exploding around
la
them.
marée qui emporte.
There were guns going off.
Face à eux, la barbarie qui se déchaîne
And
dans un sursaut meurtrier.
the barbarous
Face à
acts
eux, un continent qui attend,
affected
qui
all of
espère
them. And there
l'arrivée
was a
et le triomphe
continent
des
waiting,
soldats de la
waiting
liberté.
for the soldiers to
Mais face à eux,
arrive
surtout,
and to bring them
la
freedom.
France. La
But
France, nation sœur
they
du Canada.
were there for France.
La France,
France
terre
is a sister
d'idéal,
nation of Canada.
prisonnière
France was behind them. Behind France, Europe. Coming to these beaches is remembering these young men and women who came to fight in a faraway land, inspired by their courage and their bravery, and moved forward through the exploit. They were prepared to brave the fire, to help their fellow comrades. And in spite of that, the wind was blowing as the bullets flew. We cannot really imagine what the landing was all about. The soldiers of freedom, British, American, and Canadian, came to this beach, and they are heroes for us all, without exception. Our gratitude is eternal, infinite. France will never forget the soldiers who gave their lives for us. France will never forget that on these sands, on these beaches, the blood of soldiers of Canada was spilt here. For 80 years ago, they came to these beaches, and we will remember. We will remember those who fell, 359 Canadians on the very first day on this beach, 5,000 during the Battle of Normandy, more than 45,000 throughout the Second World War. Their sacrifice is an open wound which forces all of us, which honors us, and today again, from the Canadian War Cemetery, those who paid that high price are looking at us. We remember those who were wounded, sometimes seriously wounded. We remember those who came back, those who today are able to tell us their stories. You are heroes. You are the voices of those who fell. You are figures of courage and the face of freedom. Your presence here makes us humble, and our heart is filled with gratitude, remembering William Cameron, who died just a few days ago. Before you, under the authority of the President of the French Republic, I want to make this pledge. The memory of the veterans of the Second World War will never be extinguished. We will pass on your stories. We will remember you because your courage lives with us. The flame of your heroism will remain burning. The strength of freedom guides us. Ladies and gentlemen, I was born in 1989. I am part of a generation that has never known war, a generation whose parents never knew war, a generation who grew up under freedom and democracy, a generation that sometimes forgets how fragile freedom and democracy really are. A generation that we will constantly remind that young people our age left their country to defend our democracy, our rights. Every one of our rights and freedoms bears the mark of their sacrifice. The history here is a lesson for future, and now more than ever, we must hear that and remember it, hear it and listen, as war is again hitting Europe. And on the soil of Ukraine, people are dying for wanting to be free. We must hear and listen to their stories, because the sad passions that we've seen before are again with us. We must not fall into submission. Ladies and gentlemen, Canada and France are two sister nations, two nations whose bonds are found in the sound of those bullets. Once again, we are on the sands of Juno Beach, two nations whose friendship will forever be engraved in the history of our two nations. 80 years later, together on this beach, the shadow of Canadian soldiers is still with us, soldiers who resisted. The emotion is huge. We will remember this commitment. We will remember their courage, and we will show a commitment to that memory. Long live the friendship between Canada and France. Long live Canada. Long live France.
Mesdames et Messieurs, le lieutenant-colonel Michel Dion, aumônier des Forces armées canadiennes, et l'anémétiste et vétéran José Searson animeront la prière. Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Colonel Michel Dion, Padre for the Canadian Armed Forces, and Métis Elder and veteran José Searson will lead us in prayer.
Good morning, everyone. It is an honor for me to be here with you today and share with you in my first language, which is Cree, and of course in English. No tawinan, Creator God, as we gather here today, we remember the courage of many men and women who displayed skills and dedication to preserve our country and our freedom. We are also grateful for the veterans who returned home safely and are present here with us today. Through their interactions with us, we have been informed about their experiences and their stories. No tawina, anotskagi sigak, kenanas komitnan, ute epeminut tagusnak. Ego huta ka mamawiak, tagiskisyak anige simagan sinak. Simagan sin, kagi sipeterchik, mitanimanimaga kayasis. Ego teka tagusigik, kiwa patamak, inigok egi nan ayumana kegon katasigagik, inigok tapepu, ega egi uchim mamagu tarchik. Ego mina, mitanigietuskatagik, ketchinats, kawesta tawitsiguagok, kawesta geminoya kuta. Ego mina, mego atsayo, negiskistinan, atitani kita tagus nakawi, kipegagiwewot. Ego kipegagiwewot, tagitianis, utegi peitu tersi. Ego eiho, gigaskitanan, ja miajagok. Ja tsemutsik, tanse, kagis panikutsik, ispika gamastika itu tersi. Ego, kisik, ja tsemutsik, atsemuna, jatsik. And so we And so we thank you, Lord. Nung tawinan, ka ginotre, kagipe, sitas kawiak, ego spika tistipetiak, niwago magandanak, niwichogandanak, ninanasko inigok, egi sitas kawachik, ani simagan stikana, ego spik asasipeten, ego kagige, ego stikaiteni tenano, egawi gats kitawanagis kisiak, kagige, mina kagige. And so, Father, we just thank you for all your blessings for families, friends, and veterans whom we will never forget forever and ever. Thank you.
Today, on this 80th anniversary of the D-Day landing, we pause to remember the more than 14,000 members of the Royal Canadian Navy, the Canadian Army, and the Royal Canadian Air Force who participated in that fierce battle here at Juno Beach. We pause to humbly express our gratitude for the countless blessings that their hard-earned victory continues to provide all Canadians and many other nations in their daily lives today. But most importantly, we pause to reflect on how their sufferings and sacrifices experienced here in Normandy 80 years ago bestows upon we today, in return, with a solemn duty of remembrance. Indeed, it is incumbent to each and every one of us to derive from this historic battle invaluable insights of existential meaning, significance, and purpose that may bring humankind to dedicate itself more resolutely to building a more just and peace-filled world in the future. Aujourd'hui, la présence de quelques anciens combattants canadiens parmi nous,
Today, the presence of some veterans among us, in spite of their age, delights us all and inspires us deeply. For us, you are the living embodiment of courage and service. Please accept our eternal gratitude and know that we will remember our solemn duty to hold high the flame that was passed to us.
We recognize that the freedoms that we benefit from today came at a great cost. We pay tribute to the 359 Canadians who made the ultimate sacrifice on that day to begin the liberation of the French people, for whom war came to their doorstep and changed their lives forever. Nous demandons que les membres des forces armées canadiennes
We ask the members of the Canadian Armed Forces with a loyal heart and unshakable dedication to continue to provide their service in times of adversity, as they did in the past, those who fought on this beach.
Ask for blessings upon our sovereign, His Majesty Charles III, King of Canada, and all our political, military, and community leaders. May they serve the people of Canada with wisdom and understanding in the dynamics that makes this nation diverse, with people and culture, a heritage of freedom, an openness to others, and a love for peace. May they also help us to reconcile our ancestry into a unique expression of mutual respect of the dignity of every human person. Qu'il en soit ainsi, et que nous puissions tous
May
nous
it be
efforcer
thus, and may
de
we
poursuivre
all
nos efforts pour construire
pursue our
un monde
efforts
meilleur.
to build a better world.
Mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, please join us for the Act of Remembrance by Caporal Tricia Daigle of the Canadian Armed Forces on behalf of veterans. Mesdames et messieurs, veuillez vous joindre à nous pour l'acte du souvenir qui sera récité par la caporale Tricia Daigle des Forces armées canadiennes au nom des anciens combattants. Veuillez répondre par « Nous nous souviendrons d'eux ».
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years scan them. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Ils ne vieilliront pas comme nous qui leur avons survécu. Ils ne connaîtront jamais l'outrage, ni le poids des années. Quand viendra l'heure du crépuscule et celle de l'aurore, nous nous souviendrons d'eux.
And now, the commitment to remember will be recited by Miles Olduzinski, Aimé Bernatchez Provençal, and Jadis Colombe. Please respond with, "We will remember them." La promesse du souvenir sera récitée par Miles Olduzinski, Aimé Bernatchez Provençal et Joanne Colombe. Veuillez répondre par « Nous nous souviendrons d'eux ».
They were young, as we are young. They served, giving freely of themselves. To them, we pledge, amid the winds of time, to carry their torch and never forget. We will remember them.
Ils étaient jeunes, jeunes comme nous. Ils ont servi, donnant généreusement d'eux-mêmes. Nous leur promettons, en dépit du temps qui passe, de porter le flambeau et de ne jamais oublier. Nous nous souviendrons d'eux.
Taganokes kisiak, kioskate siwak, tapeskuts, kaesioskate siak. Kipagetin suak, egagegwan, emetsemeniko chikwinawa. Kaetenasquena moana anak, kake pese pumma techik. Peutanak, tapimotata chik, otisk kotemewao, mina egawikats. Tuanakis kisiak, kagiskis tutawananak.
Ladies and gentlemen, Caporal Stephen Abra will play the last post, followed by a minute of silence and a rouse. The lament will follow, played by Sergeant Brennan, Pinkerton Cook. Mesdames et messieurs, le caporal Stephen Abra va jouer la dernière sonnerie, suivie d'une minute de silence et le réveil. L'élégie suivra, interprétée par le sergent Brennan, Pinkerton Cook. Mesdames et Messieurs, nos distingués invités, le Premier ministre du Canada, Son Altesse royale le Prince de Galles et le Premier ministre de la République française déposeront les gerbes d'honneur. Ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished guest, the Prime Minister of Canada, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, and the Prime Minister of France will now lay wreaths. Le dépôt des gerbes sera accompagné par la musique du centenaire de l'Aviation royale canadienne. La formation musicale est composée de membres de la musique centrale des Forces armées canadiennes d'Ottawa, de la musique du 438e escadron tactique d'hélicoptères de Saint-Hubert, Québec, et de l'Aviation royale canadienne de Winnipeg. The laying of the wreaths will be accompanied by the music of the Royal Canadian Air Force Centennial Band. The band is comprised of members of the Central Band of the Canadian Armed Forces from Ottawa, the 438 Tactical Helicopter Squadron Band from Saint-Hubert, Quebec, and the Royal Canadian Air Force Band from Winnipeg. Mesdames et messieurs, veuillez vous asseoir. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. It is now time to introduce our final act of the ceremony. Performing their song, Highway of Heroes, please welcome the Troops. Il est maintenant temps de présenter le dernier acte de notre cérémonie. Interprétant leur chanson, Highways of Heroes, veuillez accueillir the Troops.
it down, and numbered a dozen upon my return. We're 100 or so, from the coast and from the prairies. I bet they keep coming. Add one more name from Ontario, and carry me home down the highway of heroes. People above with the flags flying low. Carry me softly down the highway of heroes. True patriot love, there was never more. I served with distinction, no visions of glory. I served without question, of personal gain. Seek no justification, it's not part of my story, and it offers no comfort to the ones who remain. Just carry me home down the highway of heroes. People above with the flags flying low. Carry me softly down the highway of heroes. True patriot love, there was never more. I took up my vocation, I was called by my nation. Without hesitation, my answer I gave. Now I am not wondering the things that I might have been. I'm no consolation to the forgotten brave. So carry me home down the highway of heroes. People above with the flags flying low. Carry me softly down the highway of heroes. True patriot love, there was never more. Carry me home down the highway of heroes. People I love with the hands held low. Carry me softly down the highway of heroes. True patriot love, there was never more. There was never more. There was never more. There was never more. There was never more.
Left! Turn! Attention! Right! Turn!
Mesdames et messieurs, nous vous remercions pour votre présence et votre engagement à ne pas oublier. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for your presence and commitment to remember. Please stand for the departure salute au Canada. Je vous prierai de vous lever pour le salut de départ au Canada.
National salute. Salute. Parade! Attention!
We're going to be back in Montreal. Yeah. A little bit, yeah.
How many times have we been to Normandy?
Twice. This is the second time. He came 40 years ago. He says it's like a dream he's going to wake up from. He doesn't want to wake up.
So your memory, does it bring anything back to you?
Huh? Does it?
Oh, it brings a lot of lots of things back. Everything went by. 100 years, 104 years.
A lot of it. Very nostalgic.
I'm sure.
Your head gets full that you don't know where you're going half the time. But anyway, I love it to come back.
But it's all changed since you were here.
Yeah.
That's what we were looking at.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Mesdames et messieurs, veuillez vous asseoir.
You see all them people I was with, and I don't know, that makes me feel good. To be able to help somebody else. That was the first thing.
Very nice. It's still wonderful. Very happy to be here.
So we are just trying to listen in here as the French Prime Minister, as Prince William, as Prime Minister Trudeau bend down to meet these veterans. Boy, some have some funny stories to tell. George Couture, in the end, had a chance to meet Princess Elizabeth when he was recovering from his war wounds in a hospital in England. But when he and the 20 young men got in the truck to go see the princess, the truck stopped at an intersection where there was a pub, and they all booked it out of the truck, went to the pub. The truck driver continued on and arrived without any of the soldiers who were supposed to meet the princess. So he was very much hoping to meet royalty today and make up for missing it the first time. And we saw Prince William there speaking with Leopold Thibault, who was telling him that he's 104, about to be 105.
I heard Prince William ask how many times he had been here at the ceremony, and one of the veterans, I think, said 3 or 4 times. So for many of them, of course, they have come years, decades, but I suspect this will be one of the last times we have a chance to see some of these great Canadians. And that casts a bit of shade on this. I think you were told by at least one of the veterans that he didn't think he was coming back.
That's right.
And that's something to think about.
And it's not just the rigor of the journey. I mean, traveling is difficult. I don't care how old you are, traveling is difficult.
Yeah.
Traveling is especially difficult for them, but a number of them have said the dreams come back too. And I think that's a difficult thing for them to say.
It is, yeah. This day stirs up emotions for many people, and for those who landed here or those who may have fought on air, on the sea, in the air. This can be tough.
Let's just listen, see if we can crank the audio here and hear whatever we can.
Charles here, who is very grateful. My pleasure, sir.
Thank you for being here. Thank you so much. Thank you.
August 41.
It's an interesting thing to me that we know there's so few of them left.
Place in order.
Oh, we got the safe I just want to that's very funny. My grandson, who is a lieutenant in the Canadian Navy,
Of second World War veterans back in Canada. I think and just I wonder what they're thinking about today. They're probably with their loved ones. Each of the veterans here has someone you see them standing behind them, helping them. But let's also think about the 9,000 or so veterans still in Canada, wherever they are across our country. And I certainly will. I've had a chance to talk to some of them at the War Museum. We are interviewing them to capture their memories and their experiences for future generations. That's important because we know that these veterans won't be here forever, and we need to understand what they saw and what they lived through.
Okay, there are some charming veterans in that crowd. I can just imagine what some of them are saying to Prince William.
Perhaps credit to the Prince as well. He seems to have a great relationship with these veterans too.
It's the very least people can do to listen to their stories. It's the least you can do.
I think so. It's one of the things that I have been able to do for 30 years now as a military historian. When I speak to veterans, I ask questions, but I want to listen to them. I want them to have the space to talk, because for so many years in this country, we didn't pay attention to our veterans. We didn't pay attention to our military history. We've done a better job recently, but even the Juno Beach Center right behind us, Adrienne, as you know, it took veterans coming together to build this, of which Canadians across the country donated millions when it opened in 2003. But it was not Ottawa that came up with that money. Right. And so one of the things I have often said is history is hard and we need to work at it. And we should not expect the British or the Americans to tell our history. It's our job, and I'm glad that we're doing that today.
Indeed.
DD operations. 4 years in a row.
I think that's Joseph Maxwell. Prince is speaking. So now you were looking at Annie McNamara. This is one female veteran who is here today. She served in the entertainment unit. Also with her is Howard McNamara. Right, they are a couple. You flying officer Howard McNamara from Quebec. He flew missions in the Italian campaign.
How many hours? Quite a few already.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's real.
Thank you.
Oh, nice to see you. Where are you from? This is your first time on the beach?
Prince William's father, King Charles, was with veterans in Portsmouth the other day and showing them pictures of the diary of his grandfather, King George VI, on the D-Day, June 6, 1944. Pictures from his grandfather with Montgomery.
Oh, look at this.
Very impressive.
You know what you're saying? Just about. Full naval uniform. Yeah. It's amazing.
I do believe that's Jim Parks. He's brought something for the Prince, and I think that's a picture of Jim. I think we've seen that picture. It's a Jim with Prince William's father, King Charles.
Just to show you. I don't think
You can give it to him if you'd like.
Yes.
And
if I recall, if we get a close, I'm not sure that we will, but if you were to see a close of that picture, King Charles, or Prince Charles then, is laughing. And I think Jim might have been telling him a salty tale. I'm not entirely sure, but that would seem on brand.
We think about you. Which movie? I don't
So this is an interesting conversation. That is John Priest, who told Murray Brewster that he went to therapy for years after the war and has had the dreams come back. And given the work that William has done for advocating for people with mental health concerns and being open about talking about what's happening to them, I hope they had that conversation. That would mean something.
Did they get you out of
And that would be James Spence.
Where were you?
Interesting thing about Private Jim Spence then, from Saskatchewan, is that he was sent to France in July of 1944 to help with the advance, but like so many of these men, he went on to serve in Holland, Belgium, and Germany.
Yeah, we're focusing on D-Day today. That makes sense, but the fighting continued for Canadians. And in fact, most Canadians never returned to Juno Beach. They were pushing inward. The brutal battles in July and August through France, the liberation of Paris, not by Canadians, but and then the Canadians sent up the left coast to liberate other areas and returning to Dieppe in early September. And then at the end of the war, after a series of brutal battles, the liberation of the Dutch. And so many of the veterans here had served throughout that period. But that's quite rare. And, they were often, their fate was likely to be killed or wounded if they were in the infantry. So these are veterans who have survived both improbably during the war years and then now 80 years since then.
Oh, to be a little closer to that conversation, the Prime Minister of France just took off a pin and gave it to someone. Not sure what that was. Under General Romer. So the dignitaries, the VVIPs as they are called, are moving out at this point. But this day is not over. A very special moment is still to come. And while we wait to see the veterans on the beach, Julia Wong is standing by. You were close to so much of that, Julia. What was that like for you?
Adrienne, as this ceremony got underway, there were sort of waves of different emotion, I would say, in various parts. In particular, when all the veterans were named individually, everyone here, you could see people kind of craning their necks, trying to see who they could spot. And then there was that round of applause. And you just got the sense that everyone here was so grateful for those 13 who were able to come. Also grateful for all veterans who have served this country. And there's been a lot to process over the last little while during this ceremony, a lot of time for reflection. And one person who's had the chance to do that is Diane Newkirk from Stratford, Ontario, who I spotted because of her t-shirt initially. Diane, you're here because of your father, Mac Dixon. Tell me a little bit about what he did, because he was here on D-Day.
He was. Dad was a duplex driver for the duplex tank, amphibious tank that was supposed to float. He was part of the Bold crew, and he didn't make it. The tank didn't make it to shore. It got shelled and went down. Dad, he did swim, and he did make it, but his co-driver and him together got out together, but Toppelmeyer didn't make it. Dad did.
That's quite an incredible story. And you're here today with a whole gang of family. You have some cousins, nieces, nephews, grandchildren here. What is it like for your family to be here all together on this important milestone?
Oh, it's fantastic. A lot of work to put it together because we've come right across the country to get here, and it's just so special to share and for each generation to remember, because we're not all going to be here later. We're all getting older, but my grandson's here, and my nephew and great nephew and daughter and her husband and my niece. They will remember. We remember.
It's so great that you guys could be here all together. I also want to get your thoughts on what really stood out to you during this ceremony. I mean, there's so many beautiful moments, but what is it that you will leave with?
Just the the emotion of all the veterans that were left. I mean, just to remember them all and what happened on that day. And all the civilians as well, what they had to endure. It is really touching. It's hard to put it into words. Just so proud to have been able to make the trip.
I'm going to try and squeeze in one last question. Diane, what do you think your father would say of the crowds that have gathered here, of the ceremonies that have taken place?
My dad, he didn't talk about D-Day as much. It wasn't a happy time. He lost a lot of friends. My dad preferred to celebrate VE Day. But it's a solemn time for him here. And he had come back a few times, one for the dedication of his tank that was brought up from the channel. But VE Day is what he would have really, I'm sorry, VE Day is his day.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing your family's story with us, for telling us about Mac, who we see here pictured on this T-shirt, and the whole family that's come, all wearing T-shirts, showing off Diane's father. Quite incredible to see here, and that's why they stood out to us in this crowd. Back to you, Adrienne.
Julia, thank you so much for finding Diane and the family, and what she said resonates with so many people here, Tim, at two parts. One, that, there was a time when just veterans came, and then they came with their wives, and then they came with their kids. And now, most of those veterans are gone, but their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, nieces, nephews, like 15 people can represent one person. And it's a way of keeping the memory alive.
It is the descendants that we see here. And so many people seem to have that family link, and that shouldn't surprise us with 1 million veterans who returned from the war. But one of the things to pick up there, I think, that's important is the veteran who wasn't able to talk about the experiences, the silences. That is something I've heard over and over again. The challenge of sharing the stories, and it took decades. And that shouldn't surprise us. It's the same with Korean War veterans and Cold War veterans and probably veterans from Afghanistan. And so we have to create a space, I think, for people to talk about these charged experiences. And that's something to remember today as well.
And in terms of remembering, what you're looking at on the right of your screen are some of the veterans starting to make their way to the beach. One of the first people we saw there in a wheelchair, and he has a sort of a white Tilly hat on, is Captain Bill Wilson. This is going to take some time for some of these veterans to get down there. And then it's always interesting to see how much time they spend down at the beach. That's Bill Wilson in your frame right now. Some, I think from past years, have been okay to be on the platforms, and others have said, take me to the water. And it's interesting, that just off to our right, you may hear the sound of motorcycles. Some of the dignitaries are leaving. I'm keeping an eye on looking for the two prime ministers and Prince William. We see some of the students are milling about. So there's a sense for some that it's over, but it is not over. And it's because these men were the first ones here. And they're going to be the last ones here.
Yeah, that's right. There's something about the sand, I think, isn't it? It is Juno Beach, and even though the ceremony was up here behind us in a grassy area, which was also, of course, the battlefield on that day, there's something quite evocative, I think, for those who came out of the landing craft, sometimes in the water, but headed towards that beach of death and destruction. We should not forget that 80 years ago, this was a beach covered in dead and dying Canadians. And so that is a somber thought here. And I imagine that some of these veterans, especially Jim Parks, who landed here with his brother, with the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, that's a heavy thought. And he must be considering those of his comrades who never made it off this beach.
You're going to go somewhere now.
I think that's George Couture. George didn't just come here on D-Day and survive it. He was taken prisoner and went on a death march across Europe to Poland for 10 months.
Yeah, another story we haven't been able to talk about 10,000 Canadians were made prisoners of war, often shot out of the skies in the bombers or sometimes captured at places like Dieppe, and surprisingly some on D-Day as well. Those who had advanced deep off the beaches and who were then cut off by German counterattacking forces. And to be a prisoner of war was a very difficult experience, as we can imagine. And towards the end of the war, when Germany was being bombed out of existence and suffering largely starvation, those prisoners, as you said, had to march hundreds of kilometers, often through snow, with no food, literally for weeks, and they had to scrounge whatever they could find. A really difficult time, and he made it back, and that's important.
Let's see how close we can get with the microphone. He's been talking, not sure if you can pick this up, but he's been talking about what it was like to be captured, how hungry they were,
Do you think
how they marched and were forced to march through the fields, and any time they saw any food in the fields, any onions, anything, they ate whatever they could.
Do you think the combat was worth it?
Sure it was.
What was the most important thing that you heard today from our leaders?
What was the most important thing you heard from the leaders today? What did you like that they said?
Well, maybe important thing, but I'd like to see peace on the earth with everybody instead of just fighting and the women and children suffering like they do now.
Is that what you were thinking about today?
That's today, exactly.
You think kids are aware of that?
Not so much. Some maybe, but you see pictures all together of little kids looking for food over and people running under, dropping airdrop food stuff, and then so dumb they run and get hit by the...
And you pray. Thank you so much.
If you're struggling to make out what he's been saying, he was talking about he'd like to see people stop suffering. And that it's hard to see pictures of kids looking for food and people running for airdrops. You know, this is a man who knows war, and he doesn't want anybody else to know it.
Thank you.
I have last question for Mr.
One last question.
One last question.
Okay.
For after you are the last who have been on those beaches.
Yeah.
do you think our generation can remember those memories, can pass your memories to the next generation?
Well, I think so. I sure remember the hardships they had after we landed, and I was captured and was prisoner of war and spent starvation days.
You can tell him about speaking to the children at the Juno Beach Academy in Calgary.
Oh, we carried on, yes. The children, they are attending school, through school, and every year. Bill, he's here today, this big sailor guy, and I entertain the kids. And we put on food and that.
And they wrote you letters of thanks for sharing?
Yeah.
You tell them.
And Bill drew a sword, and one day he drew it, it was all dirty yet.
You tell them about the letters that you got from the children.
Oh, I got hundreds of letters. Yeah.
What does it provoke to you?
Thanking me for the time and food. We used to give food every day to meetings, schools we attended. Yeah. It was a good time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, this is so interesting to see how all those microphones and the faces of all those veterans. You know, between signing autographs, Tim, at you know, with the kids, people asking them questions. There's, I think that, you know, they've been so gracious with everybody.
They have.
I don't know how much time they've had sort of privately alone to think, but they've been so kind and so gracious.
Day after day, and I think I could say you must be a little tired. I'm feeling a little tired, but just to see these veterans hour after hour, and there's something about living history, I suppose, that we want to get close to and to hear from them. They have stories to impart that we don't hear every day, and so I think there's that great desire to perhaps see through their eyes or walk in their steps just a little bit. And on a day like this, it becomes maybe a little more apparent to us of the things that we don't know and that the things that we wish we could know. And that's a common refrain when I travel the country talking about my books. People often come up to me and say, you know, thank you for writing this because I didn't know this history. I wish I'd been able to talk to my dad or my grandfather or my grandmother. They're gone now. And so there is something perhaps sad about this as well, this idea that we may not be able to do this in 5 years, speak to anyone. And so we have to do it now. And we should continue to gather these stories. During this broadcast, we saw some of the amazing archival footage that former colleagues of yours would have gathered over the years. That's the stuff of history that will allow us to keep engaging with the past in a meaningful way.
And as they walk down the beach, there's a stone. You may have seen some words inscribed on it. It's a chanson d'Antoine, which was the opening words. Basically, it was one of the songs that was played as the invasion was beginning. Is that the right phrase? Right over the radio to signal that to the French resistance that this is what was happening. It's a poem by Paul Verlaine, and it's very moving, particularly for the French, and it's very evocative of this moment. But if you were just heading for the beach, you might not notice it if you didn't stop and look.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you think about having a poem a song over the airwaves to signal that D-Day was beginning. You think of all the deception and all the codes. And again, I go back to all the women, the code breakers, who were back in Canada sort of transmitting messages of where the German subs were.
Yeah.
And just clearing the way for
critical
D-Day.
roles in England, in Newfoundland, of course, which was separate dominion at the time, but 50,000 women who served in multiple roles, playing a key part in this. The first time women served in the three armed forces, other than the nurses who had served in the First World War. And I've been lucky to speak to some of those veterans over the years, again, all gone now. But they were pathbreakers for other women. And, they were often looked up to as role models for those who came after them. Sort of waves of feminism and waves of women breaking through various glass ceilings, and these women who served did something special, and I think that too is a part of the story of today and of our shared history.
Absolutely. When you come to the Juno Beach Center, one of the ways you enter the center is you walk into a room that is built like a landing craft, and the doors close, and in front of you comes a black and white image with the sound of the sea and the vision of a rocking sea, and you feel it, you hear. It's an attempt to help you hear what it's like, and then you hit the beach, and then the doors open and you're in the museum. And one of the things that you see as you go through the whole museum experience is an image of a family walking along this beach. And as they walk past, and it's in peacetime, behind them are the ghosts of all the soldiers, all these men and their pals, who they know by name, and they keep saying their names, walking with that family.
Yeah.
And I feel like in the 75th anniversary, some of the veterans told us that being on the beach, they felt like they were having a visit with their friends.
These places are to some degree haunted. These are sites of tremendous violence and death, and yet there is the specters of history, and I don't doubt that many feel that presence here, because it is a part of this where we are looking at sort of the final survivors. And but we must always remember those who came before, that film footage that we've seen over and over again, black and white film footage, which is so powerful, shot by combat cameramen who were on these beaches 80 years ago. The one thing that has struck me about that is that it's black and white, and of course this was a war fought in color.
Right.
These are individuals; they were men and women. And they lived and they loved and they had great aspirations. And we lost 45,000 Canadians killed during the Second World War, 55,000 wounded. That was in color. And
as was the blood.
As was the blood, yeah. And if we look at this today, in color, but we need to make those connections back to 80 years ago. And one way to do that is to think of them in color, not just in black and white film footage.
Joining, I quite love that it's a bit chaotic on the beach right now.
Sure.
I'm not really clear. There's, people from the Armed Forces Band are there. We saw some of the Skyhawks, the paratroopers, go down onto the beach to meet the veterans as well. Who knows how long they're going to stay down, as long as they like.
Yep.
Whatever they want to do, they can do.
We should say there is a German bunker down
Yes.
there that had been almost lost. It had been buried under sand and had been rediscovered, I think, around 2010, if I remember. It was a German bunker, one of those hardened positions. In fact, on D-Day, there was a machine gun mounted on it. So the Canadians, the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, had to knock it out, which they did. Along the beaches, you will find these dugouts and German positions that are still there, stark reminders of what the Canadians had to fight through 80 years ago.
The beach continues. I mean, aside from, we were talking about the cordite earlier, explosives still pop up. I think it was last summer or the summer before, someone knocked on the door of the Juno Beach Center and said, "Sorry to interrupt, I found this on the beach, I thought you'd want it." And they said, "Okay, so now we have to evacuate and call the gendarme because the sand still churns it up."
Still churns live ammunition, dangerous and unstable, and still rising to the surface. And there's something about the memories of this war, I think, this idea of continually rising to the surface. Dangerous memories at times, as you mentioned, Adrienne. So, you know, when we talk to the veterans, we want to know their stories. We ask them questions. But we also have to be aware that it's not always easy to talk about these experiences, to talk about your friends who died on this beach or who didn't make it through the war. So there's a tension there, and we must be aware of it.
Just so everyone understands that as this is happening here, in remembrance of what Canadians did, there are ceremonies all across the Normandy coast. Omaha and Utah, the beaches where the Americans fought, Gold and Sword, the beaches where the British fought. King Charles was, of course, at the British Remembrance Ceremony today for D-Day. He had some words, and I think we have a clip of him, where he was talking about then and, of course, now. Let's have a listen.
It is with the most profound sense of gratitude that we remember them and all those who served at that critical time. We recall the lesson that comes to us again and again across the decades. Free nations must stand together to oppose tyranny.
There's a message you're going to hear again and again. I have no doubt we will hear it from President Biden as well.
Yes.
You know, Volodymyr Zelensky is also here. There's no mistaking the era we are in now and the fragility of the freedoms and the peace these people fought for.
Yeah, and this is a day, it's centered on the past, but it always reflects the present and the contemporary. And we heard that through some of the speeches from Prime Minister Trudeau and others, and just the King there. And you're quite right, President Biden will talk of this as well. And it's interesting. This is a place where our international leaders have come to pay their respects, but also, I think, to boldly say what we just heard there: free nations standing against tyranny. And you know, these former battlefields now become places to perhaps bear witness, but also to test and attest to the alliance, which is still with us today.
You know, there's a lot of learning for all of us to do. I appreciate that even you, a historian, I mean, you've said that you're learning things all the time, right, about what has happened. And I'm sort of struck, too, by the presence of, not here necessarily today, but in the past, of some German families. About 3% of the visitors to the Juno Beach Center are Germans who don't know what their grandfathers did. They didn't entirely understand what happened. No one wanted to talk about it.
Yes.
But they come here to learn too, and the learning's for everyone.
Yeah. the Germans have not always been invited to this ceremony, and it took some time to heal those wounds. In Germany, they worked hard to come to grips with their past, the 2 world wars. That is not easy history, but they have worked through it. They confronted it, often paid reparations to Israel and other nations, and have moved forward. And yet it's still, I think, a dark stain on German history. We know that, and not an easy thing for German families to come back. But I have spoken to some of the descendants who like Canadians or British or Americans, they want to know what happened to their father or their grandfather. And it'll be interesting to see how we go forward. Perhaps if there will be a stronger, for example, German presence here 5, 10, 15 years from now.
Interesting. While we have a moment, wouldn't mind going back to Julia Wong for some thoughts, and if you have some folks to introduce us to, Julia.
Sure, Adrienne. So we've actually moved to a different viewing area. We are now where the students are, and I want to bring over, 2 special students. All students are special, but these students in particular played a big role in today's ceremony. So we have Miles Odlozinski, a grade 12 student from Orillia, Ontario, and Jadis Colomb, from a grade 10 student from Cross Lake, Manitoba. You might recognize them because earlier both were on stage doing a reading of Commitment to Remember. So Miles, I want to first start with you. What was it like to be on stage doing that reading in front of thousands of people?
It was an amazing experience. Being able to be such a big part of a special and important ceremony is something I'll never forget.
And Jadis, this was actually a last-minute role for you. There was another student who was slated to do this, but she lost her voice, and you stepped in last night, I believe. So tell us, what was it like to prepare for this moment?
Well, all my teachers helped me pronounce the words. They helped me learn the words and what they meant. And it was, it's from my history, so I kind of knew how to say it.
And how special was that to be able to do this reading in Cree specifically?
I'm very, very thankful I was able to do that. Everyone's proud of me back home. Everyone's proud of me here, and I'm proud of myself.
And what do you hope those in the crowd were able to take away from that reading in Cree?
To remember. Basically to remember and to know that Indigenous people could be heard too. I was able to let them hear our language, through my voice.
That's really incredible. And Miles, let me just get a few more thoughts from you. I mean, being here, being a part of this ceremony with some pretty high-profile dignitaries, what are you going to take away from today?
Well, yeah, it was a special experience to be able to see all those high-profile people, and it was, like I said, something I'll always remember. And just also the ceremony in general, so well done, and it's something that I'll always remember. And it was very reflective today, and I will always remember what happened 80 years ago today.
Yeah, and for you two to be here, I mean, we're just sort of meters away from Juno Beach. I want to just get your thoughts and impressions of where we stand right now.
Yeah, it's incredible to think about the sacrifice that so many made for the freedom of our country and our world. And it's very hard to imagine what this would have looked like. It's such a peaceful place right now. And when I look around, I'm thankful for the sacrifice that they made.
And Jadis, yourself?
Well, this ground is full of bravery, and I'm glad that I was brave enough to go stand up there and, be brave.
All right, thank you to both of you for your time. So we have Jadis Colomb, a grade 10 student from Cross Lake, Manitoba, Miles Odlozinski, a grade 12 student from Orillia, Ontario, both taking part in today's ceremonies in front of thousands of people, a really big feat for folks who are still so young. Adrienne.
Wow, we are also very glad that she was brave enough to get up there, and I'm glad she acknowledged how nerve-wracking it is, because it absolutely would be, but she did a fantastic job. As did you. Julia, thank you very much for that interview, for all the people you spoke with. I know that as a reporter, to get an opportunity to do this means something. I mean, I don't ever I don't ever forget talking to people like that. So thank you for that. And I wonder, Tim, as we look at what's happening now, and it is kind of this kind of interesting chaos that's happening right now, and the students milling around behind us, and the veterans are still on the beach. You know, the official schedule had the veterans on the beach for maybe 15, 20 minutes, unless I'm mistaken here, and then they were to be moving on. But
we're not going to tell them to leave, are we?
No one will tell them to do that.
No. Nice to see the young people, I think, being involved in this ceremony and here and talking. There's hundreds of them. What an experience for them, as that young man just said. He's always going to remember this, and who knows what he'll go on to do, but this is something that I think will resonate with him and with so many. And I see this at the War Museum all the time, young people coming through and learning about their history and encountering things they didn't know, but nothing quite so special as this.
No. And I think because this is about the veterans, we see them on the beach. We haven't seen a lot of them today, so let's take a moment to listen to at least another one.
We had some meetings about...
What is it about you that made you survive, do you think?
Oh, the luck of the draw, and sometimes being 1 foot ahead of the other. I got buried in a trench a couple of times, and I got blown through a window, and I lost most of my hearing, and I got shrapnel in different parts of my legs, because they always told you that when you hit the beach or something, there'd be 60% casualties. So you say, well, I'm going to be at 6 out of 10. I'm going to be one of the 4 that made it. I always thought of that. I'm going to be one of the 4.
And you were?
Yeah, I was. A few little scrapes, but I was one of the 4.
Just a few little scrapes, he said. I mean, when we sat down with Jim to talk and he started listing all the things that had happened to him, and then there was, and then I got blown through a window, and then this happened. And it was like, how on earth?
Well, how on earth exactly? And I think you'd asked him that at one point. How did you move forward off the beach? How did you find the courage? I've asked that question of veterans. I've read their letters and diaries. That was a place of just incredible carnage and violence, and I don't think we can possibly imagine that. The cacophony of sounds, dismembered bodies, advancing over the corpses of men you'd served with, trained with for 2, 3, 4 years. I've talked to veterans who said, we served together for 4 years, and then my friend was killed within 4 minutes. How did they do it? The training, no doubt, incredible discipline, but also sheer bloody courage.
Absolutely.
Finding a way to fight their way forward. And that is an aspect of war we don't always talk about. In a place like this is about commemoration and reflection, but we also need to acknowledge that war is horrible, and that the face of battle is something that none of us should ever want to encounter.
No, and to hear them talk about the dreams they still have, 80 years later. One of the things that some of the veterans said that was interesting is that, as you said, they'd been talking to their buddies on the ships, the landing crafts, moments earlier. Yeah. They hit the beach, someone gets cut down, and so what do? Yeah. Unfortunately, you have to take their weapon. Yeah. Right? You can't help them.
You need to keep
moving
forward.
But they took their weapon and kept going forward. Yeah. And you leave your friend in the sand.
Yeah. One veteran, Cliff Chatterton, who was very famous in the veterans movement, he was with the Royal Winnipeg Rifles. He talked about hitting the beach, losing half of his company, going forward and advancing, but then the next day returning to the beach to see who was still there. And he found, if I remember correctly, one of his close friends killed on the beach. He picked up his helmet and he put down his helmet. And then he wore his friend's helmet until he too was knocked out about 3 months later. So many stories like that, which are difficult to talk about, difficult to understand. But for me, when I talk about war, when I write about it, that's the stuff we need to talk about. The human experience, which is so powerful 80 years ago and powerful today.
Absolutely. And it's still powerful to listen, of course, to their stories. And we have one more from Captain Bill Wilson. You've seen a bit of him today. Let's hear a little bit more of him right now.
The first thing we saw was the contrails of the superforts going in to drop bombs on the landing beaches. So that would be about 4 to 5 in the morning, and the sun would continue to rise. Next thing we'd see was the barrage balloons, and lines which indicated below those balloons were landing craft of various types. And then eventually you could see the hulls and their big lines. And I looked from where we were, almost perfect formation of all of these barges and landing craft going through the water, all heading to France. It's never been seen before in the history of man. I don't think any of us had breakfast that morning. We just stood there watching.
And that was Captain Bill Wilson. Those are the voices of so many of the veterans. You're looking at the Juno Beach Center. We are moments away from this wrapping up. This day doesn't end though. Tonight at Bernières-sur-Mer, on the beach in front of Canada House at sunset, which is quite late here, but at sunset, the villagers from Bernières-sur-Mer walk into the sea with flowers, and then they lay the flowers down in the water to represent those Canadians who didn't make it out of the water.
Yeah.
And to see the French villagers there in front of Canada House doing that is something very special. We're going to try to host a national this evening from Bernières-sur-Mer. We really want you to see that and to get another glimpse of Canada House on this day.
You know, these are people who were liberated by Canadians. What does that mean? It means their freedom was returned. For 4 years, they lived under occupation, a horrible occupation, we know. Jewish people living in France and other countries sent to the death camps. Everyone else who suffered horrendously from the Nazi occupiers. And so we shouldn't be surprised, perhaps, that even 80 years later, that there are people here who want to show their thanks, who want to bear witness to these people, Canadians, who came from thousands of kilometers away and who died here so that they could be free. And that is a powerful message.
And they were kids. The really interesting thing I find right now when you talk to the French residents of Normandy is that they have the memories of children. So they remember being little and looking up and seeing these soldiers who spoke their language and realizing these are the people who've come to save us, and they had candy for them. Yeah. And the French would give them a little calvados, give the Canadians a little calvados, some bread, some cheese. But there was that feeling from a number of the French residents that there was a lightness that even though the hell of war was still raining down on them, D-Day was different. Something was changing. Something good was coming. Yeah. And they could walk outside. Yeah. What a concept for them at that point to feel free enough to do that.
Yes, we talked a bit about this being the beginning of the end of the German armies. It's the end of the occupation for the French, at least the French here. And they remember that. As you say, all across town, there are testimonials from young people who were 2, 3, 7, 8 years old. And that I found very powerful. I mean, because we don't often think about those people who are liberated, but we have done that in war after war. And there is a reason why I have called this a necessary war. Others have called it the good war. But it is a war that had to be won. and any price had to be paid. We paid a high price, but the legacy is with us, and that is something we are marking today.
Tim Cook, I cannot thank you enough for spending time with us. Your insights are always valuable, especially here. Please come to Juno Beach. Please come to see the Juno Beach Center and to Normandy. As Canadians, it's very special. And as we wind down here, it is, of course, still very early back in Canada, where later this afternoon there will be a special D-Day ceremony in Moncton, New Brunswick. That starts at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can watch it live on CBC News Network, where you can also watch all the highlights from our special coverage here in Normandy this morning. That starts at 7 p.m. Eastern. And of course, we'll be back here tonight for the National. I'm Adrienne Arsenault on behalf of everyone here in Normandy, from our teams in Toronto who do this with so much love. Thank you to them. Thank you to you. And we'll see you later.